"This place will be perfect for you," my son said. The next day, I vanished. The first thing I noticed was how carefully they chose the place. Not the modest café I liked after inspections, but a temple of soft lighting and expensive quiet, where the menus were heavier than some mortgages. White linen draped the table. Crystal glasses caught the sunset and scattered it in gilded shards. The room smelled of fresh seafood and lemon and money. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her lashes so thick they made her blinking look theatrical. "You're going to love it," she said, voice sweet enough to hide the poison. "They have classes. Knitting, painting, little social things. You won't be bored." Across from me, my eldest son nodded with obedient enthusiasm, the way he used to nod in school when he wanted praise to last longer. My younger son watched his water glass as though the reflections inside held instructions. Their faces were polished, practiced. I had given each of them plenty of practice. I stirred my soup, spoon clinking softly against porcelain, and let my expression settle into something pleasant. A controlled smile. A soft, agreeable look I had learned in boardrooms full of men who assumed my kindness meant weakness. "That sounds lovely," I said. "Tell me about it." Relief flickered through them. They wanted compliance. They wanted a signature. They wanted a mother who could be handled like paperwork. My eldest cleared his throat, leaning in with a concerned tilt to his brow. "Mom, you've seemed a bit off lately," he began. He wore a charcoal suit I had paid for years ago when he graduated, when I believed gifts should help you step into your future. Now it sat on him like borrowed authority while he tried to fold my future into a file. "A bit off," I repeated, gentle. "What do you mean?" My younger son spoke then, careful and measured. "We talked to Dr. Harrow," he said, naming a physician I'd met once, briefly. "He said a structured environment might be safest. The staff there specializes in people your age." People your age. Not a person with a history. Not a woman with years of decisions behind her. A category. A folder. I felt something brittle in my chest give way with a quiet snap, like a crack spreading through glass. My daughter-in-law's manicured fingers found my hand, the way a salesperson touches your wrist to keep you from walking away. "It's really nice," she assured me. "You'll have friends. Activities. And the knitting classes are so therapeutic. You could make scarves, table runners, useful little things." Useful. My tongue pressed against my teeth to keep a laugh from escaping. While they discussed my usefulness, they were already measuring out my life's work. "When would the move be?" I asked. My voice came out smooth, almost lazy. "Tomorrow," my eldest said too quickly. Tomorrow meant they had toured the place, paid deposits, chosen a room, chosen a bed. Tomorrow meant they had made decisions for me like I was already gone. "We've handled everything," my younger son added. "You just need to sign a few papers." "And my properties?" I asked, lightly. "What happens to them while I'm learning to knit?" Silence. My daughter-in-law's hand tightened a fraction. My eldest stared down at the tablecloth. My younger son began to fold his napkin, then unfold it, then fold it again. "Don't worry about that, Mom," my younger son said at last. "We'll take care of everything. It's too much responsibility for you right now. Too much responsibility." The words landed inside me like a stone. For decades I had bought crumbling houses and turned them into livable dreams. I had negotiated with contractors, chased late rent, argued with banks, learned tax law on the fly. I had built an empire with the stubborn patience of a woman who couldn't afford to be sentimental. And now, because I was 72, because I had allowed them to believe I was wobbling, the responsibility of my own life was suddenly too much. I nodded, still smiling. "Of course," I said. "You're right. I appreciate you helping." They exhaled. They talked about the home as if it were a new apartment in a luxury building. Courtyards. Movie nights. A gorgeous common room. My daughter-in-law told a story about someone's aunt who loved it, as if dignity could be measured in scheduled entertainment. I listened, and inside something finished breaking. Not with drama. With certainty. That night at home, I let them fuss over me like affectionate captors. My daughter-in-law pressed 2 pale tablets into my palm with a glass of water and a practiced smile. "Just to help you sleep," she said. "You've had a big day." I took them with trembling fingers and placed them on my tongue. I tipped the water to my lips. I swallowed, carefully. When she turned away, I coughed into a tissue and let the tablets fall into my hand, slick and intact. I wrapped them in paper and tucked them into the small ceramic dish by my bed, the one my husband had bought me before he died. I lay down. I waited. The house settled, pipes clicking, the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint groan of wood. At 11, voices drifted from the kitchen, low and conspiratorial. They thought the pills had made me heavy. They thought sleep was a lock they could turn with chemistry. I moved to the bedroom door and listened, my bare feet silent on the carpet. "The beach place is at least $3.50 now," my eldest murmured. Paper shuffled, the dry rasp of documents on oak. My dining table, the one where I had signed my first contract, now held their arithmetic. "The condo downtown is close to 3, my younger son replied. "And the main house. The appraisal last year came in higher than we expected." My daughter-in-law's laugh was quiet and delighted. "We have to move fast," she said. I heard the pop of a cork, the soft rush of champagne. "Once she's in, we can argue she can't manage her affairs. The lawyer said it's easier when she's already in a facility." My stomach turned, not from surprise, but from the casualness of it. Like discussing a refinance. My eldest spoke again, eager. "If we do it right, we can sell everything within 6 months. Split it. Put it into something that grows. We'll finally breathe." My younger son chuckled. "She won't even understand. She thinks it's just a few rentals. She doesn't know what any of it's worth." I let my head rest against the wall. These were the boys I had once carried on my hip while I stapled "for rent" signs to poles. The men in my kitchen now spoke about my life like it was a prize someone forgot to claim. My daughter-in-law's voice sharpened with satisfaction. "Once she signs the papers, it's done. And if she doesn't, we'll get the incompetence declaration." I already talked to Harrow about how she repeats herself. How she forgets things. A lie I had offered them like bait. I had asked, "What time is it?" 3 times in one day because I wanted to see what love looked like under pressure. Love, it turned out, sounded like champagne. Numbers followed. They tossed them back and forth. 400, 300, 300, plus investments, plus accounts, plus jewelry. "Even if we give her a nice room," my daughter-in-law said, "it's still a bargain compared to what we get." At some point, their voices blurred with alcohol. A chair scraped. Footsteps wandered down the hallway. Doors closed. Silence returned. I waited until the house was fully asleep. At 5 in the morning, I rose and dressed in the black pantsuit I wore to closings when I needed to remind people who was in charge. I moved through my bedroom with efficient calm. The panic had burned out. In its place was a steady intention. From the false bottom of my dresser drawer, I took my passport and the small pouch of jewelry I had hidden years ago, not because I distrusted my children then, but because I distrusted the world. I took the key to a safe deposit box 2 cities away, and the notebook where I kept codes and contact names written in a hand no one bothered to decipher. I packed only what mattered into a compact suitcase. The taxi arrived before dawn. The driver loaded my bag, took the address I gave him, and asked no questions. At the airport, I bought a one-way ticket with cash and kept my head down. On the plane, as the city fell away beneath clouds, I closed my eyes and heard my mother's voice, crisp as ironed linen. "Never give anyone the keys to your dignity. Blood can sour. Dignity is a choice you keep making." I had made the wrong choice for too long. I had mistaken proximity for loyalty. The coastal city I flew to was not on any list my children knew. I had never mentioned it, because some parts of my story were mine alone. When the plane landed, warm air carried a trace of salt. My throat tightened with a memory older than my son's. The day I first arrived here with $5,000 and the fierce belief that I could build a life from it. I took another taxi, giving an address I had not spoken aloud in decades. Palm trees swayed. Houses looked newly painted or newly renovated, but the bones of the neighborhood were the same. The driver slowed in front of a small yellow house with green shutters. The yard was overgrown, the porch in need of attention, but the place still held itself like a sleeper who knew how to wake. "You sure this is it, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Looks empty." "It's perfect," I said, and for the first time in days, the words were true without effort. The key turned with a familiar reluctance. The door opened on a sigh of wood and old salt. Dust floated in angled light. Furniture sat under white sheets, making gentle ghosts in every corner. I stepped inside and let the quiet wrap around me. This was not a prison disguised as comfort. This was mine. In the kitchen, on the table, a note waited by a seashell. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "Mrs. Whitlock," it read. "I've been waiting." My breath caught. The name at the bottom was one I had not said in years. Eliza. Eliza had been my housekeeper, my confidant, the woman who knew which coffee I liked and which parts of my life I kept locked away. My sons had fired her when they decided they wanted to help. They said it was about expenses. I had felt the truth. They wanted fewer witnesses. Footsteps sounded on the porch. My pulse jumped. The doorknob turned. The door opened slowly, as if the person on the other side already knew what would be inside. Eliza stepped into the doorway, smaller than I remembered, her hair white as cotton, her face folded with years. But her eyes were the same, warm and steady, the eyes of someone who had never confused love with ownership. She looked at me and simply nodded, as if I'd only been away on a long errand. "I knew you'd come," she said. For a moment neither of us moved. Then Eliza stepped forward, closed the door behind her, and the click of the latch sounded like a decision made. "I heard," she said quietly. "A neighbor called me. Said your sons were in and out at odd hours. Said you looked smaller. They tried to put me away," I answered. Eliza's mouth tightened. "I know. Your daughter-in-law called me a month ago. She asked questions like she was shopping. How many properties you had. Whether you'd been forgetful. Whether you ever mentioned accounts no one knew about." Heat flashed through me. "What did you tell her?" "What I've always known," Eliza said. "That your mind is sharp, and your heart is stubborn." She didn't like that. Her eyes flicked to my suitcase. "So you came here." "I came where they can't reach," I said, though even as I spoke, I knew greed traveled. It hired people. It used police reports and false concern. It dressed itself in family and called you mom, while it sharpened knives. Eliza took my hands. Her palms were dry and warm. "You told me years ago," she reminded me, "if you ever disappeared, I should check here first." I never forgot. I've been coming once a month. Sweeping. Letting the pipes run. Making sure the roof didn't leak. My throat tightened. "Why would you keep doing that?" "Because you were good to me," Eliza said, simple as gravity. "And because I knew you weren't finished. You don't build a life the way you did and then just sit down and vanish." I forced myself to breathe. Tears could come later. First came control. "Are they going to look for me here?" I asked. Eliza shook her head. "Not at first. They don't know this place exists. They'll search hospitals and airports. They'll tell police you're confused. They'll cry on cue and make themselves the victims." She released my hands and nodded toward the hallway. "Come. You need to see." She led me to a door I didn't remember. Inside, the back room had been converted into a small office. Filing cabinets stood against the wall, neatly labeled in Eliza's careful script. A safe was set into the studs, hidden behind a framed painting of a beach at dusk. I stared. You did all this? I maintained it, she corrected. You planned it. I just made sure time didn't eat it. My pulse steadied, falling into an old rhythm, the rhythm of signatures and contingencies. I stepped closer to the safe, my fingers hovering over the dial. You remember the code? I asked. Eliza's smile softened. Your husband's birthday, she said. Same as you wrote it. Some promises don't change. I placed my hand on the cold metal. Behind it was proof my children hadn't priced out, and a future they couldn't steal with a smile. Outside, the palms whispered. Inside, with Eliza beside me, I let one truth settle. I wasn't trapped. I was just beginning. I turned the dial slowly, feeling each click as if it were a heartbeat returning to my body. Right, left, right. Numbers I'd repeated in my head on sleepless nights when I still believed love could protect me. The lock released with a soft, obedient sound. When the door swung open, a breath of cold, stale air spilled out like a secret exhale. Inside were thick folders wrapped in plastic, a few velvet pouches, and a small metal box stamped with the name of a bank I'd used only once. I lifted the top file and felt the familiar weight of deeds, appraisals, contracts, paper that had carried me through every storm I'd ever survived. Beneath it sat a slim notebook in my own handwriting. Eliza had kept it exactly as I'd left it, right down to the little tab that marked the page titled Contingencies. I didn't speak for a moment. My mind was moving too fast, sorting possibilities, placing pieces back into place. Eliza watched me with the patience of someone who understood that silence can be a form of prayer. They'll call the police, I said at last. They already have, Eliza replied. Your son Charles went to the station yesterday afternoon. He said you wandered off. Wandered, I repeated, as if I'm a toddler who slipped a hand loose. Eliza's mouth tightened. He cried. The kind that appears when a person knows someone is watching. Of course. My sons had grown up around contracts and closing statements. They knew the value of appearances. I set the folder back inside the safe and closed it, not locking it yet. We need leverage, I murmured. Not just documents. Proof. Eliza nodded. I have something. She moved to the filing cabinet and opened a drawer labeled House, City. She pulled out an envelope and offered it to me with both hands, as if it were fragile. I recognized my own stationery. The envelope was thick, sealed. On the front, in my handwriting, were 4 words. If they move fast. My breath stopped. I had written it years ago, when my instincts first began to itch. I'd forgotten the exact wording, the exact fear. But the sight of it sparked a line of cold clarity through my chest. I broke the seal. Inside was a USB drive taped to a sheet of paper. Beneath it, a short letter. Margaret, it began, if you are reading this, then you were right to doubt. Do not negotiate from emotion. Do not beg. They will use your softness as a weapon. Use the recording. Use the second will. Use the medical report. Protect the project. I had written it to myself like a lifeline. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it on the table. The recording, Eliza said softly. That's what you meant when you told me to keep the proof safe? Yes, I said. I started it the day Charles asked me, casually, whether the deeds were in my safe deposit box. The same day Leo asked if I'd ever considered simplifying my accounts. I could still remember their voices. Too bright, too practiced. 2 men pretending to be sons. Eliza touched the USB drive. Does it still work? It will, I said. Still, I promised myself I would verify every file tonight. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the note she'd left me, at the seashell holding down the paper. How long have you been waiting? I asked. Eliza lowered herself into a chair opposite mine. Her joints complained softly, but she didn't. Since they let me go, she answered. At first, I thought I would see you again in the city. I thought you'd call me. But you didn't. I didn't want to endanger you, I admitted. They were watching everyone around me. Eliza gave a small, sad laugh. They watched me too. Penelope came to my apartment once. She brought pastries like she was visiting a sick friend. She smiled and asked about your routines, about your memory, about your jewelry. When I told her I didn't know, she got sharp. She called me ungrateful. My hands curled into fists. Unbelievable. It was very believable, Eliza corrected, calm. I stared at the tabletop, at the wood grain running like veins. They think I'm confused, I said. That's the story they'll tell. They'll build it brick by brick until it looks like truth. Eliza leaned forward. Then we build our own story. One that has evidence. I looked up at her and felt something rare. Relief. Not the kind that comes from safety, but the kind that comes from not being alone in a fight. First, I said, we need to know what they're doing right now. Eliza reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a phone. Not sleek. Not new. But functional. I kept their numbers, she said. And I kept the neighbors' numbers. People talk when they think they're whispering. She tapped the screen, then handed it to me. On it was a message thread with a woman named Marjorie, one of my longtime neighbors, the kind who watered her plants at dawn and knew every car that passed. They're at your house. All three. Plus your brother. Another lawyer there too. They're spreading papers on the table like they own it. My brother. Tobias. The man who had always looked at my success like it was a personal insult. He had wanted me to sell our childhood home after my parents died, wanted his fair share, even though he hadn't contributed a penny to the upkeep. I'd refused, not because of money, but because the house held my mother's spirit and my father's quiet pride. Tobias had never forgiven me. They brought him to witness, I said, more to myself than to Eliza. To make it look clean, Eliza agreed. Family. Transparency. Respect. All those pretty words. I stood and began to pace, the way I did when a deal was turning complicated. They'll file something, I said. Guardianship petition. Power of attorney. They'll try to freeze accounts once they claim I'm missing. Eliza's eyes narrowed. Can they? Not if we move first, I said. We need my lawyer. Cromwell. At the mention of his name, Eliza's posture eased, as if a stronger wall had appeared behind us. He still answers, she asked. He'll answer, I said. He told me years ago that the people who betray you usually do it in predictable ways. Have your response ready before their betrayal arrives, he said. I didn't like how right he sounded. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had memorized like a prayer. It rang once. Twice. Margaret. Cromwell's voice came through, low and steady. I was wondering when you'd call. I closed my eyes. They tried, I said. They're trying. I know, he replied. They've already reached out to a lawyer with a reputation for being flexible. I heard because he called a colleague of mine to brag. The arrogance of that made my lips pull into something sharp. What do? We do what we planned, Cromwell said. First, you stay where you are. You do not return alone. Second, we document your capacity immediately. I want you seen by an independent physician today. Third, we prepare to confront them in a controlled environment, with witnesses. Eliza is with me, I said. She has information. Excellent, Cromwell replied. And your documents? Safe, I answered. Deeds, alternate will, everything. Good, he said. Then they can't corner you with paperwork. Now, listen carefully. If they've filed a missing person report, the police may try to locate you. That can work in our favor if we control the narrative. We will contact them ourselves. You are not missing. You are safe. You left voluntarily because you suspected financial exploitation. Eliza lifted her chin at that. The words were blunt, but truth rarely wore lace. I want them in one room, I said. I want them to look me in the eye. Cromwell exhaled. They are arranging a meeting tomorrow morning, he said. 10 o'clock. They think they will present transfer documents. They want your signature while everyone watches you. Agree. They invited your brother. It's a theater. Then we arrive late, I said. When they're comfortable. 10:30, Cromwell agreed, as if he'd already mapped my instincts. We walk in with evidence and a physician's report. We let them speak first. We let them hang themselves with their own words. I swallowed, feeling a pulse of anger rise, then settle. Anger could push, but it could also blur. I needed clarity. What about the recording? I asked. The USB. We'll test it, Cromwell said. And if it plays, we'll use it. If it doesn't, we use what we have, the paper trail, the medical report, and Eliza's testimony. They'll be forced into a defensive posture. People who plan to be predators hate becoming prey. After I ended the call, Eliza and I stood in the kitchen, listening to the quiet house. Outside, gulls cried somewhere beyond the neighborhood, their voices sharp and wild. The sound reminded me of the first time I'd stood on this coast with a cheap suitcase and a stubborn dream. Fear had been there then too, but it had been mine. It hadn't been handed to me by my own blood. We should eat, Eliza said, practical. You'll need strength. I almost laughed. In the middle of legal warfare, Eliza was thinking about food. But that was her gift, grounding storms in ordinary care. While she made coffee, I opened the filing cabinet again and began pulling out what mattered. Deeds to a property my sons had never heard about. Statements from accounts they couldn't touch. A signed trust document designed to activate under specific conditions, like a trapdoor. I had built it slowly, quietly, over years. Each piece added the way you add steel beams to a building you know will face hurricanes. The thickest folder was marked HC, Hope Center. I set it on the table and stared at it until the letters blurred. I had drafted the first outline in a notebook 30 years ago after watching a woman in my neighborhood get shuffled into a facility because her family wanted her house. She had sat on her porch with her hands folded like she was waiting for someone to return. No one did. The house sold within a month. I had told myself then that if I ever had enough, I would build something different. A place where older women could be safe without being erased. A place with gardens and sunlight and choices. A place that smelled like coffee and soap, not bleach and resignation. Eliza brought 2 mugs to the table and Saturday, "You're thinking about the project," she said. Yes, I admitted. They think my legacy is property. But my legacy is what property can become when it's turned into dignity. Eliza's gaze softened. It's ready, she said. The permits. The land. The contractors you vetted. The funding set aside. You did all that before they even realized you were planning anything. I looked at her. How do you know? Because I saw the documents, Eliza replied. And because I kept them safe. I checked for mold. I kept the room dry. I made sure your dream didn't rot in the dark. My throat tightened, but this time the feeling was not grief. It was gratitude, sharp and startling. We spent the morning moving through the house like 2 women preparing for a storm. Eliza found linens and aired out the bedroom. I tested the old laptop I'd left in the back room, praying it would still start. It wheezed, thought about dying, then flickered to life. The screen's light felt like a small miracle. When I plugged in the USB drive, the computer hesitated, then opened a folder. Audio_insurance. The file names were dated. My hands hovered over the trackpad. I clicked the first one. My own voice filled the room, younger by a few years, steady and deliberate. Then Charles's voice, too. Leo's. Laughter. Casual cruelty. The words were clearer than memory, and hearing them made my skin prickle as if the air had turned to ice. Eliza pressed a hand to her mouth. Oh, she whispered. I stopped the file before it finished. I didn't need to drown in it. I needed it as a weapon, not a wound. It works, I said, and my voice didn't shake. Eliza's eyes shone with something fierce. Then tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, I echoed. That evening, when the sun bled orange over the water, we sat on the porch with the windows open, letting sea air push out stale dust. I watched the horizon and felt my husband's presence in the way the wind steadied itself, in the way the world kept moving forward no matter what betrayal tried to freeze it. They'll say you're confused, Eliza reminded me. They'll try to make you sound fragile. They can try, I said. But tomorrow, they'll meet the version of me they forgot existed. Eliza reached over and placed her hand on mine, not performative, not possessive, just there. Sleep, she said. You'll need your mind sharp. I nodded, but sleep came only in pieces. In the dark, I pictured my dining room table covered in their papers. I pictured my brother's hungry eyes. I pictured Penelope's lashes fluttering like curtains hiding a theft. I pictured my sons, the ones I'd once kissed goodnight, calculating my life into numbers. In the early hours, I rose and dressed again in black. Not for mourning. For power. By sunrise, Cromwell called with the day's schedule. "Doctor at 9, he said. "We'll get the report by noon. Then we drive. You arrive at your house at 10:30 tomorrow with me. You say as little as possible until they commit to their story." "And if they try to touch me?" I asked. "They won't," he replied. "Not with witnesses. Predators hate witnesses." After the call, I stood in the small office and looked at the Hope Center folder again. I traced the letters with my finger like a vow. They had tried to shrink my world to a room with knitting needles. Tomorrow, I would show them the size of the world I had built without them. Dawn came quietly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I stood at the kitchen sink watching pale light creep across the worn counter, illuminating the small chips in the porcelain I had never bothered to fix. Imperfection had never frightened me. Dishonesty had. Eliza moved behind me, efficient and calm, placing toast on a plate, pouring coffee as though this were any other morning. That steadiness grounded me. If she could treat this day like something survivable, then it was. "You don't have to go back," she said gently, not looking at me. "Not if you decide it costs too much." I turned from the window. "I have to," I said. "If I don't, they'll keep telling the story without me. And I'm done letting other people narrate my life." At 9 sharp, Cromwell's car pulled up in front of the house. He stepped out in a grey suit that looked deliberately unremarkable, the kind that disappeared into rooms while the man inside it did not. He shook Eliza's hand with genuine warmth before turning to me. "You look exactly as I expected," he said. "Prepared?" I asked. "Unmistakable," he replied. The doctor's office was quiet, antiseptic, neutral. The physician Cromwell had chosen was a woman in her 40s with clear eyes and a manner that suggested she had no patience for theatrics. She asked me questions about dates, finances, recent events. I answered calmly, precisely, sometimes elaborating when she raised an eyebrow, sometimes stopping short when the answer required no decoration. She asked me to subtract numbers, to explain my investments in plain terms, to recount a complex transaction from memory. I did it all without hurry. I had negotiated contracts in worse conditions than a quiet office. At the end, she folded her hands. "Mrs. Whitlock," she said, "your cognitive function is excellent. Frankly, I wish some of my younger patients were this organized." I smiled, restrained but genuine. "Thank you." She signed the report, stamped it, and handed it to Cromwell. "If anyone suggests otherwise," she added, "they're lying or incompetent." "Both are useful distinctions," Cromwell replied dryly. By 10:15, we were on the road. Eliza sat in the back seat beside me, her hands folded over her purse, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Cromwell drove, calm and focused, as though this were just another appointment on his calendar. As we approached my house, my chest tightened. Cars crowded the driveway and curb, vehicles that did not belong there. Tobias's red truck sat crookedly, as if even parked it resented being restrained. A white sedan I didn't recognize idled near the sidewalk. "They're all here," Eliza murmured. "Yes," I said. "They wanted an audience." Cromwell parked a block away. "We walk," he said. "Let them feel the anticipation." Each step toward my own front door felt surreal, like approaching a place that belonged to a stranger. The garden I had planted was overgrown at the edges, roses still blooming stubbornly despite neglect. Nature, at least, had not conspired against me. I rang the bell. Footsteps rushed. The door swung open. Penelope stood there, her face performing an entire play in the span of a second. Shock, relief, calculation, and finally that familiar, practiced smile. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Margaret, where have you been?" We were terrified. I stepped past her without answering. The house smelled wrong. Not dirty, just altered, like air that had been disturbed by people who didn't belong. Charles and Leo rose from the dining table, where papers were spread like maps of conquest. Tobias stood near the window, arms crossed, his expression already defensive. "Mom," Charles said, stepping forward. "Thank God. We thought." "You thought what?" I asked quietly. "That you were confused," Leo said. "That something had happened." "Something did happen," I replied. "You decided my life was easier to manage if I weren't in it." Silence dropped hard and sudden. Then Cromwell stepped forward. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "George Cromwell, Mrs. Whitlock's legal counsel." The unfamiliar lawyer, short, tense, with a mustache that twitched when he swallowed, stiffened visibly. Tobias shifted his weight, unease flickering across his face. "This is a family matter," Penelope said quickly. "Elder financial exploitation is very much a legal matter," Cromwell replied. "And since I've been retained for years, I believe I outrank the man you found on short notice." The mustached lawyer flushed. "Now, let's all calm down," he said. "Mrs. Whitlock, we were just concerned." "Sit down," I said. The word landed with surprising force. Charles hesitated, then obeyed. Leo followed. Penelope perched stiffly at the edge of her chair. Tobias remained standing, clearly wishing he were somewhere else. Cromwell set his briefcase on the table and opened it. He placed the doctor's report in front of me. "Let's begin with capacity," he said. "According to this evaluation conducted this morning, Mrs. Whitlock is fully competent to manage her affairs. That eliminates guardianship." Penelope opened her mouth. Cromwell raised a finger. "Before you speak," he continued, "I'd like to clarify something. Mrs. Whitlock did not disappear. She left voluntarily because she suspected that her children were attempting to defraud her." Charles sprang to his feet. "That's ridiculous." "Sit," I said again. He sat. "I heard you," I continued. "In the kitchen. Counting my properties. Discussing how to declare me incompetent. Planning to sell everything while I was asleep." Leo went pale. "You misunderstood. I recorded you," I said calmly. Cromwell pressed a button on his phone. My own dining room filled with Charles's voice from a year earlier, sharp and impatient. "Let's just hope she doesn't live another 10 years. Leo's voice followed. "Once we get control, it's easy." Penelope's laugh echoed last. "She won't even know what it's worth." The sound seemed to hollow the room. Tobias stared at the table as if it might open and swallow him. The mustached lawyer began to gather his papers, eyes darting. "That recording was made illegally," Penelope said weakly. "No," Cromwell replied. "It was made with Mrs. Whitlock's consent, in her own home, in a one-party consent jurisdiction. Perfectly legal. And I have more. He didn't play them. He didn't need to." "You plan to have me declared incompetent," I said. "You plan to move me into a facility tomorrow. You plan to transfer my assets to yourselves. And you did all of this while smiling at me over dinner. Charles's face crumpled. We were just trying to help. You were trying to inherit me before I was dead, I said. Tobias finally spoke. Margaret, I didn't know about any of this. They said you needed help. I believe you, I said. That's why you're not being addressed by my lawyer. Cromwell slid another document across the table. Forgery, he said, tapping a page. These signatures don't match Mrs. Whitlock's known exemplars. That's a felony. The mustached lawyer stood abruptly. I think I should leave. You should, Cromwell agreed. And I suggest you do so quickly. The man left without another word. Penelope began to cry then, real tears at last. Charles stared at his hands. Leo looked like he might be sick. And now, Cromwell said, we talk consequences. I rose slowly and moved to the head of the table, the position I had occupied in 100 negotiations. You thought my estate was worth about $1.5 million, I said. That's what you calculated. You were wrong. They looked up, stunned. My net worth exceeds $5 million, I continued. Properties you don't know about. Accounts you never found. Investments you never imagined. Penelope gasped. Charles's jaw dropped. Leo whispered. How? Because you underestimated me, I said simply. Cromwell projected figures onto the wall. Appraisals. Accounts. Deeds. Each slide stripped away another layer of their certainty. And now, I said, you will listen. I held up my will. Not the one they had photographed. Not the one they assumed existed. This is my true will, I said. As it stands, Charles and Leo each receive $5,000. Penelope receives nothing. Penelope sobbed. You can't. I can, I said. And I have. The remainder of my estate, I continued, is dedicated to a project you never knew existed. Cromwell changed the slide. A rendering filled the wall. Light-filled buildings, gardens, open courtyards. The Hope Center, I said. A place for older women to live with dignity. Funded entirely by my estate. The room was silent except for Penelope's breathing. You wanted to put me away, I said. Instead, I built something that will outlive all of us. I looked at each of them in turn. But I am not without mercy. Hope flickered in their eyes, ugly and desperate. You will work for the Hope Center, I said. 5 years. No salary. Manual labor. Administrative work. Caregiving. Every role you once considered beneath you. Charles shook his head. That's impossible. It's prison, Cromwell said calmly, or redemption. I let the words hang. Your choice, I said. 24 hours. I turned toward the door, Eliza already at my side. As we stepped outside, the air felt cleaner, lighter. Behind me, I heard chairs scrape, voices overlap, panic bloom. For the first time in months, my smile was real. The drive away from the house felt longer than the drive toward it, as if the road itself were stretching to give me time to breathe. Eliza sat beside me, hands folded, her posture upright and calm. Cromwell drove in silence, giving us the gift of not filling the space with unnecessary reassurance. Only when the house was far behind us did I allow my shoulders to lower. You were magnificent, Eliza said quietly. I was precise, I replied. Magnificence implies performance. This was correction. Cromwell glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a faint smile touching one corner of his mouth. Correction is often the most difficult form of justice, he said. People prefer revenge. It's faster, cleaner, less work. I don't want them destroyed, I said. I want them changed. Or at least exposed. That's exactly what you did, he replied. They're terrified. Not of prison. Of losing the version of themselves they believed was entitled. Back at the coastal house, the air felt different, lighter, but charged, like the moment after a storm when the ground is still damp and the sky undecided. Eliza made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my hands, noticing how steady they were. No tremor. No doubt. Just age-earned calm. They'll try to negotiate, Eliza said. They won't sleep. They shouldn't, I answered. Neither did I for months. That night, my phone rang twice. I didn't answer. Cromwell had warned me they would reach out, try to appeal to emotion, to history, to guilt. I let the silence speak for me. The next morning, Cromwell called early. They've accepted the terms, he said. Reluctantly. Fearfully. But they've accepted. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it settle. All of them. Yes. Including your daughter-in-law. Especially her. Good, I said. She needs the work the most. Construction on the Hope Center site began 3 weeks later. I stood at the edge of the land with a hard hat perched awkwardly on my hair, watching machines dig into soil that had waited patiently for purpose. The air smelled of earth and diesel. Possibility always had a scent. Charles arrived first that first morning, wearing old jeans and a shirt he clearly hadn't worn in years. He looked smaller without his suit, younger and more uncertain. Leo followed, pale but determined. Penelope arrived last, her expression tight with resentment she was trying, and failing, to hide. I said nothing. Cromwell handled the introductions. A foreman named Mike, broad-shouldered and unimpressed, handed them gloves and pointed toward a pile of debris. Start there, he said. Move it by hand. Penelope stared at the rubble. By hand. Mike grinned. You got hands, don't you? Watching them work that first day was uncomfortable in a way I hadn't expected. Not satisfying. Not vindictive. Just raw. Charles strained under the weight of concrete. Leo struggled to find rhythm. Penelope winced every time dust touched her clothes. At lunch, they sat on the ground like everyone else. No special treatment. No quiet corner. Just sandwiches and shared water. I approached them then. This is hard, Leo said before I could speak, his voice hoarse. Yes, I replied. It is. Penelope looked up at me, sweat streaking her carefully maintained face. Is this really necessary? It is, I said. You wanted to decide my worth without lifting a finger. Now you learn the cost of effort. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. Weeks turned into months. The site changed daily, foundations poured, walls raised, gardens planned. My children changed too, though more slowly. Complaints gave way to silence. Silence gave way to focus. Focus, eventually, softened into something like humility. Charles surprised me first. He began asking questions, not about money, but about logistics, about permits, about non-profit structures. He stayed late to help workers finish tasks he wasn't assigned. Leo found his place with the physical labor, his body adapting, his breath steadying. He stopped looking at the clock. Penelope resisted longest. She cried more than once. She threatened to quit twice. But she stayed. And one afternoon, I saw her helping an older volunteer tie her shoes. Her movements gentle, unhurried. Something in her shifted that day. The Hope Center opened 18 months later. It was better than I had imagined. Sunlight filled the corridors. Gardens bloomed where rubble had been. Women arrived with suitcases and guarded expressions, their eyes searching for disappointment. Many cried when they realized no one was rushing them. No one was treating them like inventory. I walked the halls slowly, greeting residents by name. I listened to stories. I watched art classes form, book clubs take shape, friendships ignite. And I watched my children work. Not because they had to. Because they wanted to. Charles ran operations with a seriousness he had never applied to his own ventures. Leo trained with physical therapists, learning how to help bodies reclaim movement without pain. Penelope created a small beauty space, not for vanity, but for dignity. Haircuts, hand massages, mirrors that reflected respect. 5 years passed. On the morning the agreement expired, they came to my office together. No fear this time. No calculation. "We want to stay," Charles said. I studied their faces. The lines. The changes. The absence of greed. "Why?" I asked. "Because this matters," Leo said simply. "And because you were right," Penelope added. "About everything." I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the gardens full of life. Then I turned back to them. "Sit," I said. And this time, the word carried no threat at all. They sat without hesitation. No nervous glances. No silent bargaining. 5 years earlier, that alone would have been unimaginable. For a moment, I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, not as punishment, but as space. Space for truth to surface without being pushed. Outside my office window, the late morning light spilled over the central garden, where jasmine climbed trellises and laughter drifted from a bench near the fountain. The Hope Center was alive now. Fully, undeniably alive. "You know," I began, still facing the window, "when I was your age, I believed security came from control. If I controlled the numbers, the properties, the contracts, then nothing could take my footing away." I turned back to them. "But what I learned, slowly, painfully, is that control is fragile. It fractures the moment you try to hold people instead of principles." Charles swallowed. Leo's hands rested flat on his knees. Penelope's posture was straight, attentive in a way that would have once felt performative but now felt earned. "You were convinced," I continued, "that I was afraid of aging, that I was clinging to assets because I feared irrelevance. You never asked me what I was actually afraid of." Leo spoke softly. "What were you afraid of?" I met his eyes. "Being erased while still breathing." Penelope's breath caught. "Being reduced to a liability," I said. "A problem to be managed. A line item that delayed your comfort." Charles lowered his head. "We didn't see it that way." "I know," I said. "That's what made it dangerous." I moved back to my desk and picked up a single envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, sealed. The weight of it seemed to draw their attention like gravity. "This was the will you were supposed to receive after 5 years," I said. "The one that granted you each a sum large enough to feel forgiven." Penelope's lips parted slightly. "Was?" I nodded. "I tore it up months ago." None of them spoke. "Not out of anger," I added. "Out of clarity." I reached into the drawer and withdrew a different folder. This one was slimmer, newer. The paper inside was crisp. "This," I said, "is the will I wrote last week." Charles's breath hitched. And it has nothing to do with rewarding you," I said. "It has everything to do with trusting you." I opened the folder and laid it flat on the desk, turning it so they could see. "You're not inheriting my money," I said plainly. "You're inheriting responsibility." They stared. "Charles," I continued, "you are named Executive Director of the Hope Center. Not because you're my son, but because you've proven you can lead without exploiting." His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. "Leo, you are Director of Rehabilitation and Mobility Programs. You found purpose in helping bodies heal, not extracting value from them." Leo nodded once, deeply. "Penelope," I said, turning to her last, "you are Director of Emotional Wellness and Dignity Services. Because you learned, harder than anyone else here, that beauty is not decoration. It's affirmation." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "The remainder of my estate," I said, "is locked into expansion. 10 centers over the next 15 years. Different cities. Different communities. Same principles." Charles exhaled slowly. "You're trusting us with everything." "No," I corrected. "I'm trusting what you've become." They stood together then, instinctively, and for the first time in decades, They didn't reach for me out of obligation or guilt. They embraced me as equals. Not children. Not heirs. Stewards. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the gardens glowed with lantern light, the residents gathered for the weekly communal dinner. Long tables filled the courtyard. Plates clinked. Stories rose and overlapped like music. I sat between Eliza and a woman named Carmen, who had once been a schoolteacher and now ran the center's literacy circle. She leaned toward me and smiled. "Your children are different," she said. "Not perfect, but present." "That's all I ever wanted," I replied. Eliza reached for my hand under the table, her grip steady. "You did it," she murmured. I looked around at the women laughing, arguing gently, sharing bread and memory. I looked at my children serving food, listening, kneeling beside chairs instead of standing above them. "I didn't do it alone," I said. Later that night, when the courtyard had emptied and the stars hung low and generous above us, I walked the garden path slowly, feeling the ground firm beneath my feet. I thought of the restaurant. The white tablecloths. The false smiles. The way they had tried to bury me while I was still alive. I smiled to myself. They hadn't known that I had already planted something far more enduring. Not revenge. Not wealth. But a future that refused to discard the women who built it. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt finished. Not because my story had ended, but because it no longer needed defending. The night breeze moved through the garden with the patience of something that knew it would be here long after all of us were gone. I paused near the jasmine trellis, letting its scent settle into me, and understood that this was the quiet I had been missing. Not silence, but peace earned rather than borrowed. In the weeks that followed, the Hope Center settled into its rhythm. Mornings began with light and motion, doors opening, footsteps in hallways, voices greeting one another without hurry. There was no bell announcing meals, no rigid schedule imposed like a commandment. Time here bent to people, not the other way around. I watched my children navigate their new roles with an attentiveness that still surprised me. Charles learned quickly that leadership here did not mean issuing orders. It meant listening, to residents, to staff, to the subtle tensions that arose when pride met fear. More than once, I saw him sit with a woman who refused to attend activities, not to convince her, but to ask why. He learned that patience was not weakness, but strength stretched over time. Leo immersed himself in learning. He enrolled in courses, studied late into the night, asked questions without embarrassment. He celebrated small victories with the joy of someone discovering that progress did not need applause to be meaningful. When a resident took her first unassisted steps down the garden path, Leo cried openly, and no one thought less of him for it. Penelope changed in ways that were quieter but no less profound. The sharpness that once defined her softened into focus. She listened now, really listened, when women spoke about grief, invisibility, regret. She learned that dignity could be restored with simple acts: a warm towel, a mirror placed at the right height, a hand held without agenda. The salon became more than a service. It became a sanctuary. There were setbacks. There were arguments. Old habits flared under stress. But unlike before, no one ran from discomfort. They stayed. They repaired. They learned. One afternoon, months later, I found myself sitting in the library, a space that had once been an empty blueprint. Sunlight poured through tall windows onto shelves lined with donated books, each one carrying a life beyond its pages. A woman named Ruth sat across from me, knitting slowly, deliberately. "You know," she said, not looking up, "my daughter used to say I took up too much space." I waited. "Here," Ruth continued, "I take up exactly enough." Her words settled into me like a benediction. As the first year ended, letters began to arrive. Families who had abandoned mothers wrote tentative apologies. Some were sincere. Some were not. We answered only when it served the women who lived here. Forgiveness was offered as an option, not an obligation. The second year brought visitors. Social workers. Journalists. Officials who spoke in polished phrases about innovative elder care. I let them talk. I showed them the gardens, the workshops, the kitchens alive with collaboration. I introduced them to women whose stories disrupted their assumptions. This isn't charity, I told one reporter. It's restitution. By the third year, requests came from other cities. Could this model be replicated? Could the principles travel? I watched Charles hesitate, then agree, not greedily, not triumphantly, but thoughtfully. Expansion was not conquest. It was stewardship. On my 76th birthday, the residents surprised me with a gathering in the courtyard. There was cake, music, stories told badly and enthusiastically. Carmen stood and raised her glass. To Margaret, she said, voice strong, who reminded us that age is not a closing door, but a widening room. I did not speak. I simply bowed my head, overwhelmed in a way success had never managed to make me. Later that night, Eliza and I sat on a bench beneath the stars, the center quiet but breathing around us. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd signed those papers? She asked. Yes, I said. And then I stop. She smiled. You didn't just save yourself. No, I agreed. I chose myself. The rest followed. As the years stretched forward, I felt my body slow in small, honest ways. My steps shortened. My hands stiffened on cold mornings. But my mind remained clear, my purpose intact. I did not fear the changes. They were not erasures. They were transitions. I had built something that did not depend on my constant vigilance. Something that would stand even when I could not. One evening, as I prepared to leave my office, I paused at the door and looked back at the room. The desk worn smooth by decisions, the walls lined with photographs of women laughing, teaching, creating. I thought of the restaurant, the linen, the knives hidden in kindness. And I understood, fully and without bitterness, that the greatest mistake my children had made was not underestimating my wealth. It was underestimating my will. I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, where voices echoed and life continued, unafraid of time. My story was no longer about survival. It was about what happens when a woman refuses to disappear.